Great. Good day to everyone. Good day to our food bank partners in the Asia Pacific region, and good late evening to my colleagues in the Western Hemisphere. I am so excited to have you with us because we have so much that we want to share with you. First, a few instructions on the session. The session will be conducted in English. For those who require audio translation in Vietnamese, Korean, or Mandarin, please click on the globe at the bottom of the screen for your options. The session will consist of a 50-minute presentation by our partners at Mintel, followed by a Q&A, question and answer session. Please use the Q&A box also at the bottom of the screen for any questions that you have during or after the presentation. Next, I'd like to share a bit of background on this work that we are presenting you with today. The GFN product sourcing team is dedicated to developing global and regional partnerships with companies that can help unlock new sources and greater volumes of food and non-food essential products for food banks. Our team is also leading some of GFN's thinking on engagements around food loss and waste, as well as access to nutritious diets. And we are working in partnership with our GFN colleagues in field services, development, communications, grants, and network partnerships. The GFN product sourcing team, consisting of Almendra Ortiz Tirado in Mexico City, Katie Piermine in Portland, USA, and our former colleague, the now retired Karen Hanna, as well as myself, Tara Sham, based in Singapore. We've been working with the Mintel team since 2021 to help deepen our understanding of where surplus product opportunities lie in the countries where our food bank partners, you, operate. For this, we conducted 2 strands of deep dive research. The first is an analysis of where, how much, and why food losses occur in the supply chain. Mintel surveyed nearly 400 individuals in China, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, and Vietnam. With over 70 questions, there is a lot of information to process. Thankfully, the team at Mintel will help us get a regional Asia-Pacific view of what we've learned from this research. Following this event, I'll be sending each food bank the full set of questions and responses so that in your own time, you can review the questions and answers and be further informed on your country's context and opportunities for the food bank firsthand. The second piece of research was a collation of detailed industry, product category, brand information on manufacturers in 11 countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Following Mintel's presentation today on the first piece of research and the Q&A, I'll speak very briefly about the second piece of research. I'll also be sharing the data with the respective food banks following this webinar. Now to Mintel to present the first piece of research, the food recovery opportunities in the APAC region. I am very pleased to introduce to you the 2 people who led this very detailed research and analysis, Hannah Pucci and Colby Clester, both of whom are directors of consulting for primary research at Mintel. Hannah and Colby, over to you.
Thank you, Tara. We are very excited to dive in tonight. Thank you everyone for joining. We will go ahead and get started and start moving through the findings from the first portion of the research that Tara mentioned. So briefly, we'll touch on this methodology slide, although Tara did go through a lot of the details. She mentioned we conducted almost 400 interviews among B2B respondents in relevant food manufacturing, handling, distribution, and in retail who have knowledge of the food supply chain at their specific company. We fielded this survey among 11 countries of interest, and this was completed in late 2021. Now let's dive into the key findings. So first, we want to set the stage. We find that just under an average of 30% is estimated to be lost at any point in the supply chain. We do find that currently 72% of respondents state that lost food is discarded or thrown in the trash, and only 14% state that their company currently does donate to a food bank. So a lot of opportunity there. Awareness, however, is a hurdle to overcome. 62% of our respondents are aware of food banks and what they are, but only 29% are aware of Global Food Banking Network. 17% of respondents surveyed report that their company has a current food recovery or donation program set up in place today, and 36% of respondents express interest in becoming involved. And of course, lost food is lost value for a company. And of course, the past few years have had a strong impact on how companies deal with lost food, with 42% of respondents reporting COVID-19 has had an impact on what that process looks like for them. And I'll pass it over to Colby to discuss the journey of loss in the food supply chain now.
Great, thanks, Hannah. As Tara and Hannah alluded to, we have a very robust amount of information to share, having collected 70 plus questions. That naturally leaves a lot of answers and a lot of data to dig into. So before we go any further into those details, we wanted to share sort of a bigger picture of what that journey of food loss looks like in the food supply chain. And really this serves to identify the 6 areas of the supply chain that we honed in on for this research, starting from, basically going from farm to table. Starting with agriculture and farming was one distinct subset of our respondents, followed by the supplier and ingredient industry, on through to manufacturing and production, followed very closely through distribution and wholesale. And then on the retail side of things, where food waste occurs in retail grocery stores, and last but not least, food service. What this bigger picture, I think, presents is the fact that the recovery opportunities are widespread. We see, of course, that the rate or the volume, rather, of food loss is roughly even across each of these 6 segments of the food supply chain. It somewhat spikes in the beginning on the farm side of things at 30% there. And then on the back side of that supply chain, you see also 30% being lost in estimated volumes in food service. But really, between those 2 points of the farm to table model, we see pretty significant volumes of loss. Summarizing things even a little bit more around why and how that food gets lost. The first side, or sort of the first half of that supply chain, the themes are really around overproduction. Most of that loss does occur due to overproduction in both agriculture and manufacturing, taking the majority. But you'll see, of course, as we go further into the details in this report, the reasons for loss are wide and varied. So lots of nuances, and again, lots of opportunities, I think, for food recovery based on what type of stakeholder you're speaking to at any given moment. So overproduction being the theme in the first half of that supply chain. On the back side, you'll see a lot of talk about expiration dates naturally, going from distribution on to retail and food service. The biggest contributor to food loss is obviously due to product that does not move and ultimately expires past its due date. And we'll go further into the details again as we move through this deck. I'll hand it over to Hannah to actually walk us through some finer details in each of these various segments of the supply chain.
Thanks, Colby. So as Colby mentioned, these do vary by kind of which stage we're at. And of course, a detailed understanding of what's happening at each stage of these various components of the supply chain and within each industry is key to informing that sourcing strategy. So we'll start at the beginning with agriculture and farming. And as Colby mentioned, we see loss typically occurring in field or in transport. So key drivers of loss here are overproduction, machinery issues, transportation, and weather. And when it comes to marketability, we're seeing that volume, size, and different things like shape come into play. When we get to supplier ingredient companies, we see inventory and transport being key areas of food loss. Key drivers, again, machinery issues. Old and ineffective tools were frequently mentioned by respondents in this particular stage. Excess inventory, expiration dates, as Colby mentioned, we see that start to come into play in this stage, and transportation again popping up as a key issue. You'll start to see some common themes throughout each of these industries appearing. Into the manufacturing and CPG producer. This is similar to the supplier and ingredient industry. So again, we're seeing inventory and transportation being key areas of loss. Here we see overproduction, excess inventory, again, machinery issues, expiration dates, and stock rotation errors being key contributors. We also start to see storage and/or refrigeration issues driving some of those age and quality issues, and we'll start to see storage and refrigeration popping up again soon. Moving into distribution, wholesaler, and warehousing. Food loss here tends to occur in transportation, but we do see some occurring in inventory as well. So some key themes across these last three industries. Expiration dates, machinery issues, and transportation certainly are coming into play here again. We do also find that organizations are not always able to act flexibly when they need to account for that lost food and move to kind of prevent that. Getting into the retail stage, retail grocery, transportation drives food waste for retail groceries. So again, a key theme we see pulling throughout the supply chain. Preparation and sorting on site, however, are also key contributors at this retail grocery stage. Refrigeration also being a key component, specifically within that transportation realm. So refrigeration in trucks, for example. Excess inventory and expiration also being a key driver of waste here. We do see that COVID has had a significant impact, specifically on this industry, in the amount of excess food created. And finally, food service and restaurant. Here is where we start to see customer waste really contributing to the food waste overall. This is followed by storage and prep as key reasons for food waste. Here we see production, including overcooking and spillage driving food waste, as well as marketability, including mislabeled foods and imperfections. So of course, now that we've looked within each industry, we want to look across industry and pull out key themes. So of course, drivers depend on where we're at in the food supply stage and where we are at in terms of different companies and what their role is in that stage. However, key drivers across different industries include overproduction, machinery issues, transportation, and expiration date. We also know that the past few years have had a huge impact on how companies are dealing with lost food and the impact of lost food overall. 43% of APAC respondents state that COVID has increased the amount of excess food produced by their company, and companies are not always able to act quickly in order to prevent this. Only 37% of respondents state that their organization can act flexibly to minimize production errors specifically and subsequent waste for that. We mentioned awareness, of course, is a hurdle that we have to overcome. In addition to this, there are several other hurdles, one being health and wellness concerns. 82% of APAC respondents who experience donating a product past a sell-by date or dealing with expiration issues have health and wellness concerns. So that is certainly something to address when speaking to different companies. 78% of respondents state their company would donate more food for recovery if the logistics were easy to manage. So that's certainly an area to focus on when discussing this with different companies. Connecting with each company to uncover specific points of loss is crucial to addressing specific concerns. Those concerns might be including, of course, transportation, storage, and shelf life. Certainly those concerns that we've seen across industry and with key concerns popping up within each industry are important to address as well, but making sure that connecting to these companies one-on-one is part of the process is going to be very important. Making donation a seamless part of the company's existing process is just as important to make this a very easy transition for them to easily donate the food. And with that, I'll pass to Colby to speak to some future state.
Thanks, Anna. Before we dive into even deeper details of our research findings, it's probably worth taking a brief pause and a brief moment to think about the fact that this is a moment in time where we've captured this data. And of course, the industry is continuously changing with multiple innovations currently in the works that we at Mintel follow as part of our wider research, and that we believe may ultimately impact the degree and the volume to which food and drink is lost, and subsequently ways in which recovery might also be affected. I won't go through all of these sort of themes in the interest of time, but considering that we are seeing advancements or technology being developed around, for example, smart or nanotechnology packaging, where, for example, in the relatively near future, biosensors may be used and implemented into packaging, that when we think about expiration dates and shelf life, such biosensors may ultimately help to extend such shelf life or allow consumers to make and producers to make more intelligent choices about how that product is used in a timely fashion. Of course, things like non-thermal processing technologies may also likewise have implications about how perishable products may see longer shelf lives, being stored at longer term room temperature. So all this to say, as we think about food recovery opportunities, keep in the back of your mind ways in which new and emerging technologies may affect how the food industry, how the food supply chain is made less vulnerable and is strengthened in a way that either reduces food waste or empowers new ways to recover food at the end of the day. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Hannah, who will help us to basically dive a little bit more deeply into our survey results.
Great. Thanks, Colby. So of course, first we want to understand a little bit about the food mix of who we spoke to and food loss coming from that. So most of our respondents work in food. Prepared components like sauces, meals, and snacks were frequently involved, but you're able to see the breakdown here. So looking at grains and pulses, fruits and vegetables and tubers, respondents from all types of industries touching various different types of food. Similarly, we also looked at respondents who work in drink industry. Of course, agriculture and farming, focusing on dairy here, and food service most heavily involved in drinks, but 49% of respondents did work in the industry in some way. As mentioned, just under 30% of all food and drink is estimated to be lost at any point in the food supply chain. As Colby mentioned earlier, you'll see that it's a little bit stronger in the agriculture and farming at the beginning, and then again at the food service at that tail end. So just kind of bookending the supply chain there, but no significant differences to note. So looking specifically at each stage, so we first want to look at the grow stage, so agriculture and farming. We do see that loss in agriculture skews earlier in the chain. So again, as mentioned, in field and orchard is where agriculture and farming sees most food loss. We do see some popping up again in transport to distributor and market, but it is fairly focused at the beginning of that chain. Looking at the production stage, we see actually this focused in the middle. So in inventory and transportation, as mentioned earlier, we see that that's the key area of food loss where that loss is occurring during that specific production stage. In the distribution, we see this shared almost relatively evenly between inventory and transport, with transport just a little higher than that inventory stage. So again, transportation, a key area of loss, not only for distribution, but other cycles as well, other parts of that cycle. And finally, sale. We see, of course, this is relatively evenly distributed, as mentioned, but it does fluctuate to spike a little bit in customer waste. Customer waste, of course, playing a key component in that kind of tail end of the food supply chain and accounting for quite a bit of that food loss and food waste here. A lot of information on this slide, but overall, this really shows us the key reasons for food loss broken down by each supply chain stage. So packaging, transportation, retail stage, for example, and we see that most respondents are focusing on packaging, which is largely driven by machinery issues, transportation, as you'll see a key theme popping up again, and distribution, mainly focused on those expiration dates, are key contributors to food loss across each stage. So now we want to understand, of course, the current state of handling food loss and waste and what's happening now. When it comes to current processes that these companies have in place, 72% of respondents state that the lost food is currently discarded or thrown away. We see that followed, although not so closely, by selling or giving the food to employees. However, we see this more likely to be in a food service or restaurant scenario, where agriculture and farming at the beginning of that supply chain are more likely to be composting or a different kind of process there. 29% have a current program or initiative in place in some way to reduce food loss. We do see that despite this being relatively low, 63% of companies report they are working on solutions to repurpose lost food in some way. These solutions that they're working on vary. Supplier and ingredient companies and manufacturer and CPG producers are focused on selling food with upcycled ingredients more so than other production industries. But when you look at this chart on the right here, we see that upcycled ingredients, expiration date innovation, and extending shelf life, as well as source reduction, are all fairly evenly distributed. So a lot of different solutions moving around. Looking specifically at farming and agriculture, we find that 19% of these respondents specifically are incentivized to overproduce. So not a large amount here. We did want to hone in on those who do overproduce and are incentivized for that, and understand where that lost food is going. So I do want to note a lower base size here, but we did see that overproduced food typically is discarded or thrown out, composted, or used for animal feed, and those being the top three solutions for that lost food from overproduction specifically. Of course, wanting to understand factors that limit donation. Why aren't these companies donating more? What are some of the hurdles around that? Transportation constraints is one of the top limiting factors, followed by insufficient storage and refrigeration, as well as expiration of food before distribution. These mirror factors for food loss. We do see that food expiration, health codes, and cost specifically do have a really strong impact on that limiting factor by respondents who selected each. So these are certainly hurdles to address and overcome. With that, I'll pass it to Colby to go into the details around each specific food loss.
Great, thanks, Hannah. So for the next few sections, till now, we've kind of talked about the results in terms of the 6 industries that we've honed in on across the food supply chain. For the next 6 sections, we will talk about groups of types of issues relating to food loss. So here we'll start with those that relate to the ability to market a product, such as packaging issues, ripeness, shape, or size issues. Followed by that, we'll talk about environmental factors, such as weather or mold is one thing that we'll kind of deep dive into. Following that, we'll talk about production and technical factors. That's where we'll explore a little bit more of that overproduction issue that we see in the first half of the supply chain. Then I'll talk about market fluctuations. So this would relate to any food loss happening due to an inability to foresee changes in demand or excess inventory, for example. From there, we'll talk about transportation and distribution issues specifically. That's where refrigeration will come into play. And then last but not least, we'll talk about quality issues. These relate to product age, expiration dates, safety recalls. And then from there, I'll hand it back over to Hannah to round out our presentation and see a bit more detail on attitudes and impressions around food recovery and food rescue specifically. Of course, again, very robust details. We'll be sharing out this deck with you after the call. So please don't feel the need to read everything in the quick time that I run through these findings, to give you kind of just a taste at this point before introducing those deeper details to you. As mentioned quite frequently before, packaging is what really drives most of the marketability issues. These tend to arise, what we say as down later in the supply chain, really in that sort of distribution and retail phase, or distribution and production phase, I should say. It's driving about, I would say about 78% of our respondents cite that they have lost food due to packaging issues. This is followed closely by volume, size, and color as well. But for packaging specifically, again, we see this really occurring among those grocery and food service stakeholders, as well as among the suppliers and the ingredient producers as well. Factors like ripeness and other sort of physical qualities or imperfections are naturally happening and being caught a little earlier in the supply chain, naturally in the farming and agriculture phase. So while packaging issues actually remain the most common marketability issue, product like shape, cuts, and ripeness may actually be on the rise in the near future. So kind of breaking each of these sections down, that you'll see, we talk about the frequency, and for here, marketability issues are happening roughly every other week to on or a monthly basis. But when we interviewed our respondents and asked them, okay, what do you think about the future? How will this change? We do see some lack of optimism in fixing this in the near future. Over half, or just about half, of respondents think that more packaging issues may be occurring in the near future. Same with volume, size, and ripeness issues. These are problems that don't seem to have easy fixes and will presumably be creating just as much food loss, if not more, especially as we consider disruptions to the supply chain. Obviously, COVID-19 has brought about significant change. Conflicts around the world, of course, is going to have ripple effects. So definitely the opportunities for recovery are very present, and definitely will be continuing in the near future with marketability specifically. So when we think about packaging specifically, the packaging stage is actually where we tend to see the most cosmetic imperfections being caught and producing the most loss. And again, this is the packaging is occurring mostly down chain. Whereas on the flip side, you'll see that harvesting really is producing less volume or less loss. naturally again at the ag and farming industry there. But certainly I think when it comes to marketability, the key term is packaging, and that seems to be the biggest pain point in with this issue of marketability. Thinking about what happens to those products with these marketability imperfections. Landfills are generally the most common destination. But if we wanted to identify where most donations are happening in this space, packaging does seem to be the biggest opportunity for donations to happen, which is where 18% of our respondents say that they are ultimately donating those lost products. But otherwise, the landfill is unfortunately currently the endpoint for this lost food, as you can see in the gray dots there along each of these phases, taking the top spot for this type of issue. Next, we'll talk about environmental or weather factors. Obviously, this is a less a place where one can have a little bit less influence, unfortunately, but definitely important to consider. When we talk about environmental issues that contribute to food loss in the Asia Pacific region, mold by and large comes out on top, with about 70% of our respondents indicating any loss recently from mold, obviously contributed by humidity conditions. That is most commonly impacting food crops. Of course, grains and pulses, as well as fruits and vegetables, are the biggest victims of these environmental issues. One thing to note too, that I think we actually see some connections with some other types of issues. Power outages are relatively common in creating food loss here at 59%. This we'll see also, I think, tying into refrigeration issues and instability around consistent refrigeration. Occasionally, especially in phases like distribution and transportation, being a very vulnerable place where food loss kind of spikes. So we'll see some connections with power outages, and that naturally tying into infrastructure. So certainly a lot of these issues, while we're talking about them in distinct groups, there's a lot of interrelated components or drivers of food loss for sure. Talking about frequency a bit more, mold, power, and pest issues are occurring most frequently. It's worth noting here that most of those environmental issues are more on a seasonal basis, right? Happening every few months to twice a year, less often. Except for power outages, you'll notice that those happen a bit more frequently and a bit more unpredictably, I would presume. Here, when we ask about change in frequency predicted, power has a much lower confidence level. Almost half of those respondents who do experience loss due to power outage anticipate that this may be happening more, if not about the same. Just about 9 in 10 of those respondents think it's going to stay the same or increase. So certainly that is, as we think about man-made reasons, power is certainly something to keep in mind as a way that we can intervene and potentially influence that factor a little bit more, given its man-made nature versus other seasonal factors, which may, while they may be a bit more regular and a bit more predictable, perhaps, certainly are a bit harder to control. Let's talk about production and technical factors. This is where the overproduction comes into play that we mentioned earlier in that supply chain. Reasons for production or technical issues as a whole We see technical errors in harvesting, processing, or selling as the biggest reason for food loss in this type of issue. Of course, that contributes in itself to oftentimes to that overproduction. Tools or machines that are old and ineffective are also a relatively sizable contributor to those technical issues that result in food loss. Of course, spillage is, as we'll see, it's a less common issue, but when it happens, it seems to happen, it seems to contribute quite a bit of volume. So on the next slide, we'll talk a bit more about that. But before we do, we asked our respondents, how flexible do you feel when it comes to minimizing these sorts of production errors? Confidence here, again, is relatively spotty or not universal for sure. Only about a third of our survey respondents felt that their organizations are flexible when it comes to being able to react to and adapt to production errors that might help minimize food loss and food waste. So I think one of the opportunities for sure is to, help those partners to feel more flexible. Consider what we can do to strengthen their ability to not just react to those production errors, but give them partnership in terms of, if there is food loss, if there are errors, we're here, and able to react as a recovery partner and be able to, make that food loss, as painful as it may be, a useful loss, something that might make them feel a little better about those errors occurring. While technical errors are the most common issue encountered in this group, of course, as I mentioned, spillage, while it is happening a little bit more frequently, most of these other production issues like technical errors or wrong weights or labor shortages or product trials, all of this tends to happen more on a monthly to quarterly basis. But spillage, as you can see there in the third line, is happening a bit more frequently than other production issues. And because of that, you can see it contributes to more product volume loss, more product loss by volume at about 6.5% of estimated loss due to that issue. So definitely, while you're likely to encounter more organizations that are suffering from technical errors or tools and machines that are old and ineffective, those spillage issues may feel a bit bigger for those individuals who do experience spillage. Next, I'll talk quickly about market fluctuations. Shortages of other resources used in the food supply chain are really the biggest issue here in terms of contributing to feelings of lack of planning or demand fluctuation. Technological resources such as tools or labor are the most resources most in short supply. I think too, thinking about COVID-19 and how that disrupted the labor market for many regions around the world, that's where we may be seeing some implications from COVID-19 here, in that labor was a little bit less predictable due to the impacts of COVID-19. So that's one of my theories there. Energy and utilities are closely behind as another resource in short supply. And again, that may relate to the power outages that we saw, perhaps relating to the sort of environmental factors. These are happening on a relatively frequent basis as well, on a more of a monthly to quarterly basis, I'll say. And that's probably, as companies conduct those planning milestones, perhaps on a monthly basis, that sort of a cadence may be a good time to check in with partners when when they're feeling like this lost product is most top of mind as they're conducting those planning reviews. Quickly here, I'll talk about transportation and distribution. Refrigeration is most top of mind and the most common issue contributing to food loss when we think about transportation and distribution. Even further down the line, certainly thinking about rejected freight or buyers refusing a load specifically, only about 28% of our respondents indicated they've experienced rejected freight resulting in food loss. But even when we dive a little bit more deeply into that reason, we still see refrigeration potentially top of mind, as the types of freight rejection is crowned or topped by temperature range issues, followed very closely by improperly contained freight being the reason for rejection. And while refrigeration and infrastructure issues are the top causes of food loss related to transportation, spillage, again, is the most frequent cause of product loss, excuse me. As you can see, most of those transportation issues are happening on a monthly to quarterly basis, but spillage issues are happening more so every other week to a month. So again, contributing to a relatively higher volume of loss versus other transportation issues. And last but not least, I'll quickly touch on the details around product age or quality degradation or quality loss. This includes things like safety recalls or concerns, as well as touching on expiration dates. When we ask about the reasons around age and quality that contribute or drive food waste, again, storage and refrigeration issues are top of mind here. As we think about the retail side of the supply chain, refrigeration again is a significant resource and a significant contributor to food loss when it does not work. The types of storage issues naturally creating food loss that contribute to age and quality loss, again, refrigeration tops out in this category. Safety concerns specifically that lead to subsequent waste are happening more frequently with both storage and refrigeration, as well as expiration dates driving roughly 5% of total product loss annually. So definitely a significant volume overall. When we think about what products are affected by safety recalls and concerns specifically, it impacts most types of food, namely meals and meal components. The more prepared items, such as meals, snacks, are really the most likely to end up on safety call watch lists and resultant food loss from there. When our respondents think about the reasons or their concerns for donating food past its sell-by date specifically, by and large, health and wellness concerns are really what drive those concerns. Of course, legal implications and laws and regulations are still in mind for about a third or about 34 to 37% of our respondents. But even notwithstanding legal compliance, general health and wellness of customers remains top of mind for hesitancy around donating food past its sell-by date. We've talked about the issues. Let's talk about something a little bit more rosy and promising. I'll hand it over to Hannah to talk about the food recovery landscape specifically.
Thanks, Colby. So now we'll dive into interest and future potential participation. So we wanted to understand agreement with a variety of statements over food loss and recovery. We find that 58% of respondents agree there should be more support around food donation options. So extending a note and making sure that they know that support is there can be really impactful. Logistics, as we've mentioned, are a big barrier for donation. 78%, as mentioned, state their company would donate more if logistics were just easier to manage. So making sure they're very clear on how we could help with that may impact that ability to donate or likelihood to donate. Of course, addressing company and brand concerns that currently exist as hurdles to donation through marketing could help boost likelihood to donate from these companies as well and overcome those hurdles. When it comes to products that these companies currently have for redistribution, most have packaged goods or prepared foods to donate. And when it comes to frequency of excess food, we find that that food is currently likely to be available about once a month or every few weeks. Now, when it comes to interest in support from the food bank, 84% of respondents state their company would be interested in logistics and transportation support, really speaking to specifically that transportation hurdle that a lot of them have mentioned. And 82% express interest in support for refrigeration and storage. Again, identifying and addressing some of these key issues that they're seeing throughout that leads to food loss. They're really hoping that food banks can offer support through to help them donate that lost food. We also did find that food service and restaurant respondents were significantly more likely than all others to express interest specifically in connecting with the food bank to pick up the product to donate, or local connections with food banks to build partnerships in really serving and giving back to their local communities. We also wanted to understand specifically in the words of these respondents, what factors are required for a food recovery organization to work with them. Again, we see these key themes popping up. Transportation and storage are really key in making sure that they would consider working with a food recovery organization. Something that also came out in the open-end response is overall transparency. So really making sure that these companies understand the process of donating the food, where it is going, how it's getting to consumers who need it, could be really impactful in getting companies to partner together. Now diving into current awareness, I know we mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, 62% of respondents are aware of food banks and how they operate. 29% express awareness of Global Food Banking Network specifically. When asked about specific organizations and food charities, however, 36% are not aware of any food charity organization. So overcoming that awareness hurdle is going to be key as a first step. We also looked specifically within each country to look at strong awareness of regional food banks specifically, and we see there is some stronger awareness of regional food banks over Global Food Banking Network within some specific countries. We do find that China and Indonesia have fairly even awareness, however, between global food banking and regional options. So definitely great to continue promoting a variety of different options in rescue. We also wanted to understand awareness of non-food organizations. We did find more awareness here. Only 32% of respondents, however, state their company currently works with any charitable organization. So there's certainly an opportunity as companies expand community efforts to become involved with these communities and become an organization of choice. Just 17% of respondents report having a food recovery or donation program in place today. Examples of programs that were mentioned include Food Bank Singapore, Rise Against Hunger Philippines, Indian Food Banking Network, and Feeding Hong Kong. Of those who do not currently have a program in place, only 4% have ever participated in the past. So encouraging these companies to participate in the future is going to be key. 36% do have interest in participating in a new or expanded food recovery or donation program. So 63% were neutral on the issue, so still a great opportunity to capture all of those respondents. And just briefly, the impact of COVID-19, 42% of respondents did state COVID-19 has had a strong impact on how their company handles lost food. Of course, companies are likely evaluating this on an ongoing basis, as Colby mentioned, as the world continues to change and we go through different crises. This is going to continue to have an impact on how companies are responding and handling lost food. COVID-19 has contributed to increased excess food for 43% of respondents. This is most relevant in the agriculture, distribution, and grocery sectors, as you can see that broken down by industry here on the right. And just briefly, before we wrap up here and move into Q&A, we'll touch on the firmographics and who we spoke to. Most respondents did hold the title of manager or senior manager, but we did speak to people above that level as well. Respondents did represent a mix of industries, of course, as you've seen from these 6 kind of key components. Most did fall into the ag farming or distribution, wholesale or warehousing, but we did have a minimum of at least 30 across all industries to make sure we have that minimum base size for statistical reasons. Most respondents have been in their industry for over 10 years, with about 5 to 9 years at their current company most common. So a lot of tenured respondents reporting back into this survey, and of course, having a strong knowledge of the food supply chain at their company. 75% of respondents report their company has less than 4 locations globally, 39% reporting 1 location. So some do have a multiple country footprint. And most respondents are coming from mid-sized companies. 60% report they have 50 to 499 employees at the current company they are at. And with that, we'll wrap up our presentation and pass it back to Tara for some Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Hannah, Colby, for synthesizing that immense volume of information for us all. That was a fabulous presentation. Thanks for walking us through that. For the food banks, this is a whole lot of information for all of us. It was for us at GFN as well to process. I urge you to come back to this recording of this session once you receive your country's data, the survey questions and responses, and it will help contextualize the information that you'll have in those data sheets. So please watch and rewatch this session. Right now for the Q&A, the question and answer session, please type your questions into the chat function. I will read them out and point to someone on this call to answer them if I'm not able to. So the first question from Thomas at Feeding Hong Kong. Hi, Hannah and Colby. Could you please share more about the types of surveys, surveyees, so I believe survey respondents you choose. Thomas, I think we managed to cover that at the end of the presentation. But Hannah, if there's anything you wanted to add on what you presented there, go ahead.
Yeah, great question. So we did focus on respondents, of course, who have a strong knowledge of the food supply chain in their industry, as well as respondents who work within these specific industries of interest in countries of interest. So they were required to have that working knowledge. We were rating them on that. Beyond that, there were no restrictions on company size or business model here. We let all of that fall out naturally. Colby, I don't know if...
I think that covers it. I think the only other sampling point of interest might be that we wanted to ensure a diverse range of respondents across the food supply chain. So not just sort of focusing on one industry or another, but getting a very diverse range of industry experience to just really help uncover those recovery opportunities all along from farm to table.
Thanks both. Okay, on to the next question from Craig Nemitz at GFN. Hi, Craig. Ripeness in agriculture and farming. So his question is, ripeness is the biggest issue at 81%. Does that mean it's unsellable because of being overripe or underripe?
Great question. And yes, that ripeness issue directly as far as the way our respondents interpreted it was basically just either underripe or overripe. Yes, that is a correct interpretation.
Thanks. And one more question from Thomas at Feeding Hong Kong. You state that only 25% of the distributors, wholesalers are flexible to manage minimizing production errors. Does this result vary very much within the APAC region? So across different countries, is there a large variation in the responses?
I think that's a great question. Thank you, Thomas. That is, I don't believe that was actually covered in our deck, but I did see that question a few minutes ago and did manage to pull a quick chart together, dug into the data. I don't know if I could share my screen. Happy to throw that onto the screen if I'm able.
I think you can just click share screen.
Okay, yeah,
that would be great.
Cool. Yeah, this is what the data looks like. It is not, it does not appear to be statistically significant. So this, that's probably due to the fact that, each of these base sizes is somewhat low. It is high enough to enable what we call significance testing to basically tell ourselves the results and the differences are meaningful and not due to chance or randomness. But here's what those results look like by country. So these are these figures that you see here, and apologies for the lack of other details around this, but the numbers that you see are any respondent indicating that they see their organizations, their companies as flexible. So we do see a pretty wide difference in that, and I think Thomas, you're probably correct that there is some degree of development that contributes to those feelings of flexibility. With China topping out at over half of its respondents feel that their organizations are flexible. So I think that the average was about 30 or so. About 33%, if I recall. So well over the average. On the flip side, we see Malaysia, Thailand, and Taiwan feeling much less flexible. We can certainly share these results out in tandem with the deck as well. So you've got them on hand. But yeah, a very wide spread in terms of confidence in flexibility to react to those production errors. I think this is, again, a place where your strategy for recovery and talking about food rescue does vary a little bit by the country that you're sort of speaking to, so to speak.
Thanks, Colby. So I don't see other questions in the Q&A box. There is still time. Thomas, I see another one from you. There is, just before I go into that, if there is still time, and if you'd like to type your questions in English or Vietnamese, Korean, or Mandarin, please feel free to type in, and we'll get our translator support to help me understand those questions and read them out to you. So please, you can continue to use the Q&A box. Thomas, another question from Thomas at Feeding Hong Kong. If refrigeration and cooling chain is such an important contributor and opportunity for surplus, could you gauge whether this is due to negligence, absence of funding, or something else? Was that something you could pick up from the surveys?
It's another great question. Thomas is bringing it to the table. We'll have to, I think, dig a little bit more deeply into some of the open-ended responses to give you a sort of more accurate answer there. but anecdotally, I see a lot of potential correlation with a few other factors that saw, some sort of similar rates or of occurrence. Thinking about, power outages and the frequency at which those happen versus loss due to refrigeration. I think we saw some similar numbers. So we might say that refrigeration issues are potentially due to a bit of not so much involuntary, not so much voluntary negligence, but involuntary factors that may be a bit, beyond, that may be related to perhaps infrastructure or otherwise, the rate of development of that area or of that stakeholder. But we can dig a little bit more into that. I think, Hannah, unless you've got anything else to say, that might be a place where we can go a bit deeper into our data to provide some light.
Agree.
Thank you. Another question here. This is from the Scholars of Sustenance team in Thailand. Hi, Hannah and Colby. Great information overall. A quick question from our team at Scholars of Sustenance Foundation in Thailand. We have several partners that donate food to us in order to minimize waste disposal costs as a factor for donating food, rather than expecting tax benefits. So they would like to know if there are any figures or any data points that they could use for future reference in potential food programs with food manufacturers in that respect. So where there's an interest around minimizing the cost to disposing surplus.
There is certainly a emphasis on cost and that being a limiting factor, and that certainly having a strong impact. We don't have any information directly tied to tax benefit or implications kind of around food donation tied to that specifically, but cost definitely can be a limiting factor and definitely emerged as one in that specific data point. So when it comes to specific factors that limit donation, while it's not one of the top 3 factors, it definitely has a strong impact when it is involved. So certainly a data point there.
Thanks. A new question from Wang Jie. Maggie, hi. Maggie's based in China. What she captured on the barriers of donating food were awareness, logistics, and health wellness factors. Is this correct? She wanted to make sure that she got this overview, and was there anything that she missed?
I think those are definitely 3 of the strongest kind of hurdles that I see. In addition to logistics, I think storage too, and I know that ties in a little bit, but focusing not logistics just on transportation and part of that process, but certainly incorporating the storage component and refrigeration along with that being a key hurdle as well. Colby, I don't know if you have anything else to add here.
No, I think that's spot on. Yeah.
Excellent. We have 1 or 2 more questions coming in. One from Joma at Rise Against Hunger Philippines. Hi, congratulations on a good presentation. Just wondering whether the study was able to capture the impact of legislation with food loss, waste, and donation.
Great question. The one data point that comes to mind, I think, as we think about safety recalls, a direct pulse that we collected in that, for example, I mentioned just about 1/3 of our respondents consider legislation specifically and regulations when thinking about those, when thinking about their concerns with donating food that may have somehow been involved in actually expiration dates. I may have misremembered that slide. I think that does, sort of indicate we do seek our respondents to some degree thinking about legislation in their hesitancy to donate lost food. But relative to other factors that were discussed that seem to be a bit more top of mind, such as the refrigeration issue, I think it is a bit more of a secondary concern versus more logistical barriers that have been kind of mentioned earlier. Hannah, would you have anything to add there?
I don't think anything to add. I do think that the legislation area is certainly something I'd love to dig into more, I think, in the next iteration of this, especially as that changes, but nothing to add on that topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's worth noting too, our survey was originally pretty lengthy. We had to, I think, make some unfortunate cuts, and I want to say we, may have discussed legislation. I think it is certainly a place for further exploration, for sure. But I would say we captured quite the lion's share of concerns, if you will. Yeah.
Thank you both. And as you'll all be familiar, GFN has been working with the Harvard Food Policy and Law Clinic to do some analysis around legislation that encourages or discourages food donations. So we can also share that link around too for you to have a look at. So that's a separate piece of research. We haven't covered all countries in the region just yet. Still working on developing that set. One last question from Thomas at Feeding Hong Kong. Really appreciate your answers. Thank you. Thomas's question is around whether you're available to do surveys for just one food bank. I'm just going to answer first and just say, Thomas, so the what we've seen today is an aggregation of the individual country surveys that Mintel did. So there's a set just for Hong Kong, but that's Hong Kong as a whole rather than specifically for the food bank, because it's talking to industry partners. So that data set we will share with you after this. However, you're most welcome to get in touch with Hannah and Colby around specific areas of research that you'd like to add on to. Hannah, Colby, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, we're definitely, we've got strong surveying capabilities in Hong Kong. I think we might have at least one or two other projects currently that may involve Hong Kong. So yeah, our team, Hannah and I, we are exclusively custom survey research. So certainly within our wheelhouse of capabilities.
I think that's it. There's one last question from my colleague, Katie Piermine, that I'm going to pull out and point to you, Hannah and Colby. Just from all that you've seen in this research, what surprised you most, and where do you think there's a need for further research?
That's another great question. Certainly, I think the legislation implications are top of mind. I would say too, we could probably explore or do a bit of a deeper dive around, economic implications, thinking about, the disruption of something like the Ukraine-Russia conflict, how that's quickly, for example, disrupted, Egypt's supply of wheat. I think thinking about, how socio-political or world events like that may influence food loss and recovery could be something interesting to explore. As far as what surprised me most, I think I was most surprised by the diversity of reasons for food loss. You guys are certainly the experts in this. I expected, I think, a bit more skew towards, a few reasons for food loss. but it's such there seems to be such a diverse amount of opportunity that I, as an outsider, didn't expect. And I think that just underscores the importance of food banks and organizations like you guys to truly make a difference. That it's the scale at which food loss is occurring was staggering to me, again, as an outsider. So I'm very thankful in light of that kind of surprise to a consumer like myself. I'm very glad there's folks like you guys who are helping to make a difference there. Hannah, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I was really surprised not only at all of the different areas where food loss can occur, but I think also that there aren't a lot of companies that currently have programs or initiatives in place to reduce food loss. I know that although a lot of companies are thinking about it and maybe future looking, that there's not a lot of priorities and strategies in place today for these companies. And so that was a big surprise for me and very eye-opening too about what is currently happening. So agree with Colby too around the need for further research, understanding too the legislation impact, and also just continuing to research how we can help encourage these companies to become involved and make a difference here.
Thanks. I'm gonna read out one last question before I talk a bit about that second piece of research, and we can wrap up the session. Last question here from Justin at Katara Soup Kitchen, which is based in Malaysia. Most responses from corporates mentioned that they approached in Malaysia mentioned their fear of bad PR in case of food contamination, right? So that's a hurdle for donations in Malaysia. Was this a major reason that you saw in terms of corporates or companies' reluctance to donate? The other question, and I think this is actually answered in the slide deck, Justin, that whether there's any analysis done on the flexibility of a company to donate to specific products to food banks.
In terms of the major reasons why companies are reluctant to donate, we certainly see that health codes or liability concerns do pop up, and those certainly have a strong impact on why corporations might be hesitant. And I know too, we mentioned in the open ends that transparency is really coming through and going to be key in overcoming that hurdle. And I think that that's where that comes in, is making sure that the process is transparent to the corporation and ensure that some of those liability concerns are decreased because of that. So I think there's certainly some areas where that could emerge as a reason why corporations are hesitant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we had another slide too, where we talked about some of those major hurdles and across a number of topics and concerns about it was certainly, I think, major enough. I believe it was about, sorry, I was just looking at it. I think it was about 30 to 40% of our respondents sort of think about bad PR specifically when thinking about donating and the potential for, something like food contamination or, bad experiences with expired foods. But again, it was, I think, a little bit more secondary versus those other primary concerns like logistics, sort of like the tactical needs to be fulfilled in facilitating a donation or food recovery. But definitely, significant enough, I think, just, secondary to other factors.
Questions and for the brilliant responses from Hannah and Colby. I'm just going to shift this quickly to that second piece of research. I'm not going to go into great detail, but I wanted to share this since I have you here, share a bit more and we can follow up later. And then I'll be closing out the session. So I mentioned that there was a second piece of research, and this was to collate detailed industry information across 11 countries. That was Australia, China, Hong Kong, Malaysia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, and Vietnam. So the data sheet, and I'm going to try and share my screen. I know nobody likes to see a spreadsheet on a shared screen, but I'll be showing it to you now. You don't have to look at any of the detailed information. I'm just pointing out some of the columns where you'll find useful information. So the most relevant here, I'm going to just walk through a couple of these columns. I've hidden some because there's a lot of information in these spreadsheets. I'm using Singapore as an example because I'm here. So the most relevant here, I think, for a food bank would be the product name. So what the product is called, as you would find it on the shelves in your market. And then the brand that owns that product. And then the ultimate company that owns the brand. So as you know, it's not always the same name. So it's helpful to have that information separated out. We've also got information on the product categories. So it's soap, bath products, paper products, meals, breakfast cereal, processed meat, etc. And then there's the subcategories. There's also a very detailed description of each product. I've hidden that column here because, again, it's a lot of text and we don't need to go through that here. Other information that you'll find in this spreadsheet is storage. So where it's food, whether it's frozen, shelf stable, chilled, etc. There is pricing information. I've pulled it out for the purposes of this recording because this recording will be shared more widely, but you will have access to that information, food banks. So the price, the package volume, unit per pack information, etc. Additional information that we think you'd find useful is the company, their local address in your market, the manufacturer, where that information is available or where there is a manufacturer locally, importer information, and equally importantly, distributor, right? The name of the distributor, the location in your country. So I'm going to stop sharing there because that's really just an overview, so you know what I'm talking about. What do you do with this data? The data is intended to provide you with new industry contacts and information that you may not have previously had. So it can help you see what additional product opportunities there are also with an existing donor. So quick example here, if you receive surplus cereal X from a distributor, with this data, you can also explore sourcing additional products that you now know that distributor holds. So that distributor may also have cereal Z or toothpaste, another toothpaste brand or something else. That can all be new product opportunities for the food bank. Another quick example, you might be currently receiving brand Y instant noodles from a company. But with this data, you now know who their parent company is, the parent company of that brand, and you know that the parent company owns 3 other brands with products like tinned vegetables, etc., that you also need at the food bank. So now you have enough information to have a much wider conversation with your product donor. So those are some of the ideas of how this additional research can help you. As I mentioned, this data will be shared with you shortly, and you're welcome to send me any follow-up questions. We can schedule a one-to-one call, or we can just talk about this data on our next product sourcing check-ins that I have with each of you. So that's just a quick roundup of the second piece of research. Given the time, what this leaves me with is just to thank everyone, thank the Mintel team first and foremost for this incredible data that you have collected and crystallized, synthesized, analyzed, and shared with us so clearly. Thank you to the i3 team and everyone on the back end, the translators that have helped us navigate through this complex set of information and being able to share it with you all. Thank you so much to the food banks, for all of you for joining us today, for watching and rewatching this recorded. And thanks obviously to my colleagues at GFN for their support in bringing this webinar to you. That's it. We've got 9 minutes left. I think I can give the 9 minutes back to all of you to use for something else the rest of the day. I think there is one more question, but I can follow up with you directly on that, follow up directly with the food bank. So thanks to everyone. Great to see you. Your feedback is welcome. If you'd like to get in touch with the Mintel team for specific work you're interested in your markets, please do let me or the Mintel team know. And if you have any questions on any of the data, me and the product sourcing team, we're here to support. So thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Have a good night.